it could get swallowed up,
Yes,
you know? Yeah.
yes, yeah. That's not a good thing. Well, tell me about a typical day in Dublin as
Oh
compared
gosh.
to a typical day in Kerry.
Oh my. Typical day in Dublin. When you're 50 years of age, it's hard to pick one typical. There's a whole lot of different phases, you know.
Take it from a 10-year-old child's viewpoint.
Okay,
Pick an age, go.
getting up in the morning and at the, one of the strongest childhood memories, I hated breakfast. Hated breakfast. I mean, I love food,
Mm.
but in our house you had to have a raw egg with a teaspoon of cod liver oil. Yeah, I'm glad you're all groaning because it was disgusting. And they were very sweet and they put a little bit of fresh orange juice in with it, but I can still taste, you know, you try and swallow it back real quick, but the egg mightn't have been beaten up enough and I can just feel the bit of yolk slithering down. And then later on the cod liver oil. Ugh. So that part I hated.
Yes.
But then my dad always, and actually right through my years in college, my dad always had a soft boiled egg for me for my breakfast. Always. And he knew exactly how long to leave it in the water and when to take it out and, you know, how soft I'd like it. That's what, every single morning. Right through college even, my dad did my boiled egg for me. And again, another image is of him at the bottom of the stairs. Not my mum for some reason, but him yelling at me to get up and to come down. And then school, you know, in terms of 10 years of age, I did start out in the local national school, but my mom wasn't well a lot when I was a kid. So at 10 years of age, I was going to the junior school of the high school that my sister went to. And so she'd put me on the back of her bike and on her carrier, and she'd cycle me to school every day and bring me home uphill and downhill. And then home, I've no memory of doing, well, I have memories of doing homework. And just out on the street playing. That's what you did, you know. No fancy play dates arranged with anybody. You played on the street.
What kind of games did you play?
Hopscotch,
Mm-hmm.
marbles, conkers in the season. You know the acorns of the. You didn't play conkers.
No.
You know the acorns. You put a string into them. You hang them off a string, and somebody else has a conker, and the goal is to try and hit the other person's conker so it cracks in two. I mean, half the time we'd be bashing each other and you'd miss the conker. You know, I don't know where we got the name conkers for. It was the acorns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about things like jump rope? Did you do that?
We did a little bit of that. We did, to be honest with you, we used our imaginations. We didn't even have jump ropes.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing we did do was we used to play cricket. Clontarf Cricket Club was very close to us, and we used to go up sometimes watch. They'd even have international cricket games, so we'd set up our little wickets up against the pillar outside the house, and from one side of the street to the other, you know, we used to play cricket. Our version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we used to swim. We used to go because we lived very near the water. On summery days, we'd go down to the Clontarf baths and we'd swim.
Sounds like a nice life.
Wasn't too shabby.
Not too bad at all.
No, not too bad at all.
And then
I have
when
no
you
complaints
then
about
when
it.
you went to Kerry, it was
Just totally carefree. My images are of just being outdoors all the time. Just outdoors all the time. One of my aunts who would come down in the summertime as well, the men were all left in Dublin working, you see, and the women and the kids stayed in Kerry for the whole summer, and there was 15 first cousins, and then there was another family with 3 second cousins, and there was another family then, the O'Morons, who their dad set up Gael Inn in Dublin. They used to all be down there. So there used to be about 18 or 19 kids. But this aunt anyway, on a fine day, and probably on not so fine days either, she had this great big old ancient car. She was a small little lady. Her head barely came up above the wheel, you know. And she used to pile about 15 kids into her car and take us back to Cowmine Strand or to Clogher Strand. The boys were allowed to sit in the trunk.
mm-hmm.
The lid of the thing would be open.
The boot.
4 in the boot. 4 or 5 boys with their legs dangling from the back of the trunk. There was a judge staying in a hotel once, a local hotel, Granvin's Hotel, and he did approach my aunt once, you know, trying to remind her as gently as he could that, you know, what she was doing was really illegal. And the girls were all packed into the car, and we would just we have wonderful photographs of just kids everywhere, climbing the rocks, you know, in their swimsuits, in the water, having fun, and, you know, the boys beating up on the girls, and, you know, the girls being girls, and,
Yeah.
you know, sitting on local donkeys, and that's what a
Just
day
having a good
consisted
time.
of. Yeah. And then when we came back, we'd stay in my aunt's house. There was always chores after dinner. Big table, everybody sitting around having dinner, and everybody had their chores to do, whether you were washing up, drying, and these were all in Irish. Níochan, what's it? Scuba nulor, cleaning the floor, and then somebody else used to have to go out and do the hallway. It was a lovely black and white tiled hallway, you know. We all had our definite jobs, and she had a glass house beside her house where she grew tomatoes. And our jobs, we used to hate the bloody tomatoes. We'd be in the greenhouse, you know, hot and sticky, and we had to wash and shine and wipe all the tomatoes and crate them and box them for wherever she was selling them to.
Oh, because she sold
She
them.
did,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was, we didn't mind the washing up it, but the tomatoes was like, oh God, we hated those tomatoes.
What did your dad stay behind in Dublin and do?
Working, he was a schools inspector. He only had a certain amount of vacation, you say, time.
Oh, I see. Oh,
He would
so he
only have
wasn't a
3 weeks. No, he was originally, but he went to the Department of Education then he became a schools inspector, kind of like in a superintendent's position. So he was on the road a lot, inspecting schools, you know, supervising teachers and that. And then later on he would travel to Europe as part of the OECD, the Organisation of European Economic Community, or something development. It's got some other name now. So he only had his 3 weeks in the summer holidays.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. You were talking about food and your breakfast, which sounded
I know, it
awful.
was awful. It was.
Now, how about the rest of the meals that you would have? Typical type of food that you would have? Would your mom make? Was there tea? Was there your big meal in the afternoon? That kind of a thing.
No, we had our meal in the middle of the day. At that time, my dad used to, and all the fathers on the street did. A lot of the fathers, you know, where we lived, they worked for the civil service. They were in the government income, or Department of Excise. My best friend's dad was. They were all in various departments anyway, because so many of the people on our street were transplanted from the country, and that's what they all ended up doing, basically, going into the civil service. And so Daddy would come home in the middle of the day on his bicycle, and he'd have his dinner and he'd go back in. So we would have tea at tea time, which would be like a salad or a sandwich or cheese and toast and, you know, very simple food. Yeah, good food. My mother always loved to cook, but it'd be potato and vegetables and a meat.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you go home,
And very little fancy stuff.
Yeah. What's the thing that you like to go? You can't get here, but you can get there. That you like to go back. And
You know, you can really get out nowadays. Even since I came over here first, it's changed. You can pretty much get everything, and the food in Ireland it's phenomenal right now. I mean, it's top class. My sister loves to cook. I love to go home to my sister's dinners. Yeah.
And did she bake?
She does everything.
And
She's
did your mother-
dangerous.
Yeah, she's dangerous.
She's dangerous.
Did your mother bake?
She did. Mother was a great baker as well. Great baker. She used to make these gorgeous eclairs, you know, chocolate eclairs smothered with cream and chocolate. They were just, and you know what fresh Irish cream is like.
Best.
And it is. It's the best. So she'd make the roux pastry, and then she'd stick it in the oven and she'd take it out and, you know, she'd let them cool down a little bit. And our job was to slice around the middle, and then you'd have to scoop out the middle that was still not quite raw, but just a little undercooked, so the cream could go in. And we used to love scooping out the middle so we'd get to eat it. And then when she'd melt the chocolate, you know, running your finger around the pot afterwards, and the taste of that melted chocolate, ooh, it was good.
Cream
She was a good baker though, yeah.
Cream here you beat and beat. Over there you just can beat it with a fork practically.
Yeah, it's different. It's rich. Yeah.
And did she have a recipe for bread that she passed on, or who was the baker that did the bread?
Mother.
Your mother.
Yeah. But we all learned to make bread.
Yeah.
I make it here even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you use her recipe?
Not really. I'm a bit casual with it. It's a fist of this and a fist of that, and you know when you get so familiar with a recipe. I mean, that literally is fist of brown, fist of white. I will put in a little bit of something today, a bit of wheat germ and a bit of bran and a bit of something else, and a bit of molasses or something, and experiment maybe with a bit of yogurt and.
So if somebody asked you for the recipe, it'd be hard put.
I couldn't actually. No, I couldn't give them a recipe. I think the basic thing is, as long as you have the correct amount of baking, raising agent in it, you're grand.
Yeah, you could do almost
Yeah.
anything. Yeah. I always love the bacon and cabbage when I go over. You don't like bacon and cabbage, see? Oh, that's.
I can smell the cabbage in the kitchen still. I finally, at this age of my life, started cooking cabbage, but I do it a little bit differently. I didn't mind eating it, but the smell of cabbage in a kitchen, it always seemed to linger. And again, I can smell my grandmother's kitchen with the cabbage, or even my mother's kitchen with the cabbage. Hated it.
So that wasn't one of those sentimental meals you went
No,
back for,
absolutely not.
huh?
No,
Did you have a favorite toy when you were a child?
I don't think so.
No.
Nothing.
Nothing pops into your mind.
Nothing pops into mind. I know we wouldn't have had many toys.
Now you got to be a teenager.
My favourite toy?
Well, all right.
No, I'm joking.
You got to be a teenager. How did life change then for a teen? It had to be different in Dublin than it was in Kerry.
It was, yeah. I actually hated my teenage years in Dublin, to be honest with you. I hated secondary school. I look back and I think my mother was someone who didn't want to let her kids go, and the youngest one is often, I won't call myself rebellious, but in her eyes I would have been. And so she would have tried to tighten the noose around me, and she would have done it quite successfully through various forms of intimidation and fear, and they worked. But in Kerry, there was again still far more freedom because we used to go to all the Cayleys. And they were so much fun. We were allowed again take off at night time and wander, we used to go over to Ballydavid and to Maria where the Begley family, they're great musicians, very well known in Ireland. They had a dance hall over there, and 2 or 3 times a week there'd be a Cayley on, and they were so much fun because at that point Ballyferret was a great place for all the students from around Ireland coming to learn Irish.
Mm-hmm.
So there was great fun, and this group of students would change every 3 weeks. So there was constant people our own age coming in to learn Irish. So you went to the dances and they were just so much fun, so much fun. And all the old traditional dances, the Cayley dances, the set dancing that we hear here on a Thursday
Yes.
night, Siege of Venice, Walls of Limerick, all those kind of dances. And then our older brothers were always supposed to pick us up and bring us there or bring us home, but they never bothered. They'd be off somewhere else, And when I think of the stuff that we did, there was I won't say a shortcut, but we could walk across the beaches home at night, and 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd be making our way home. Just car come by, maybe hitch or just, and you felt totally safe.
Yeah.
And our parents assumed we were safe. They were fast asleep in bed.
Yeah.
And here's the boys, God knows doing what, where.
Yeah.
There are some pretty hairy stories about what they got up to.
So
But
what time did the dance start in the summer?
I suppose about 9 or 10 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm. And how far would you have to walk to get to the dance?
3 or 4 miles maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, often somebody would drop us off. The walking piece was more on the way home.
Yeah.
When they were supposed to pick us up and they didn't. And if you couldn't hitch a ride, thumbing as we used to call
Yes,
it,
right, yeah.
but you felt totally safe. You could stick your thumb out and whoever stopped you was, someone you'd know,
Yeah.
and they'd bring us home.
Would you ever bike there?
I never had a bike there, and it's funny that you should ask. I don't have, I don't remember my cousins even having bikes. We just walked or thumbed. Yeah. Or else somebody would drop you somewhere.
So then there was a new boyfriend every 3 weeks.
It wasn't even boyfriendy stuff. It was more like gangs.
Yes.
And kind of silly teenage stuff, more like crushes, and you'd like someone, and someone, little nudge, nudge, wink, wink,
Yeah.
but nothing too major.
Yeah.
A lot more innocent than kids today are. I mean, it was innocent.
Yeah.
It really was. Yeah.
And how about in Dublin? Did you dance in Dublin? Did you have places that you liked to dance?
There was a place in Clontarf, but again, you see, my mother's noose was a little bit tight around me in Clontarf, and I wasn't allowed to go out an awful lot in Dublin. A lot of my friends in school would have been going. There was a place in Clontarf called the Grove, where everybody went. I didn't go all that often, and I would be dropped off at a certain time, and at midnight my poor father would be sent to pick me up, and everybody else would still be at the dances. So I think my poor father decided it was simpler to give in to my mother and not fight her, go pick me up. So I really don't have very happy associations of Dublin in my teenage years.
Yeah.
No. And Mom was sick a lot. My mom had a lot of issues with her nerves and stuff. And again, I think a lot of it went back to her childhood, not having a mother.
Yeah.
She had quite a lonely upbringing, and I think it manifested itself in the way she raised us in many ways, trying to hold on.
Yeah.
And not letting go,
Yeah.
so I would have fought with her a lot.
Yeah.
poor little woman.
I used to fight with my mother too.
Yeah, I think it's a mother's job, isn't it,
I
to
think
fight
so.
with kids?
Yeah. Just fight with one of them anyway.
Yeah.
My
Oh, she's,
brother never had
yeah.
the phone. Could you describe an Irish sky for me?
I heard you asking that to somebody yesterday, and the only word that could come into my mind was grey.
Really?
Grey. But you were right. There is no sky like an Irish sky. You know, you have to look up and see it as part of the colour of the country, of the landscape of the country, because some of them are extraordinary. But my overriding colour is grey. You know, if you think of a whole life spent there.
Yes. That's very interesting. And how about a night sky?
Black.
Just black.
Again, Kerry nights.
Yeah.
We used to have to go down. Marybridge Slattery lived about 100 yards down from my auntie's house in Ballyferret, and we used to get our milk from her. And we used to have to go down to her with the tin cans. Did you remember those?
Yes,
They were
milk
the
cans.
milking cans.
Yes.
Now, not the big things that you'd bring to the creamery. They're about that height with a handle.
Yes.
And we used to have to go down to Marybridge at night time to get the milk, which I hated. It wasn't pasteurised.
Yes.
Awful taste from it, straight out of the cow. You know, it's like I didn't like the association with the cow to be that close. You know, I preferred when it came off the shelf in the shop.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's how I like chicken too. I'd like to have it in the grocery store, not go to the farm and get it.
Yeah.
It's a different taste.
Too real.
Yeah.
But the milk, we used to go down, and it was just black. And especially on a night, I mean, you didn't have many clear nights. You'd almost be feeling your way. And Mary Bridges' house was only like 200 yards down the road. Just black, pitch black. You couldn't see your nose. You learned to feel your way, and you learned to, you know, sense who was close beside you, because that was the only light you had.
You didn't have a torch?
We didn't have torches, no. I mean, you could see somewhere when you'd set out, you could see the light of her house kind of set back, and you knew that's where you were heading. But to get there, you had to walk down a pitch dark road. And of course, all those spooky stories that you'd hear during the day, you know, I mean, you're brave together, but there's still a bit of you that's sort of not quite sure what's going to jump out from the hedge behind you or beside you, or if Nell Devan across the road would start, you know.
Who's Nell Devan?
Nell Devan was a woman we were all terrified of down there. And Nell Devan had no teeth. And the only time she was ever seen was at Mass on a Sunday morning. And she was a recluse, I suppose, really. And the only memory I ever have of her is a small, skinny, wizened little woman. And she had the shawl, the black shawl on her head. And she'd wrap it across. You'd never see her mouth. She'd bring it right across her face. So you'd just see the little eyes. And she was just somebody to be frightened of. And of course, there was all kinds of stories about her. I discovered in subsequent years, though, that my brother and my male cousins were awful. They did some dreadful things to her in later years. But there was a lovely story about Nell Devan being at Mass one day in Ballyferret. And at that time, nobody took foreign holidays. You know, people didn't. But there was one woman, Maureen Forterre, who was a little bit more exotic than everybody else. And she probably had Spanish blood in her. She had beautiful olive skin. She loved the sun. And she would have been the first person to start going on foreign holidays. So Maureen went away to Spain or somewhere. And she came back and she was at Mass one Sunday. But she happened to be sitting in the seat in front of Nell Devan. And she was wearing a dress. Now, not by any means low cut, but, you know, a rounded neck dress. So you could see her neck and the lovely colour on her arms. And Nell Devan is leaning up behind her in the church, you see, and she's got the shawl across here. And she's staring with utter fascination at Maureen Forterre. And the next thing, a hand comes out from underneath the shawl, and probably a filthy, dirty old fingernail. And she goes over and she scratches Maureen Forterre here. And she turns to somebody beside her and she said, "Is that skin?" And that is the truth, is that skin. So, I mean, that tells a story in itself.
Right there.
Yeah. But I discovered just last year, I was at home and a couple of cousins again were sitting down, you know, as they do at home, telling stories. And one of my cousins says, I don't know how Nell Devan came up, and he says, "Did you hear what we used to do to her?" And we said, "No, what?" There's a cemetery where most of my family are buried. My Kerry, you know, all the Kerry people are buried. It's called Doonurlin. Beautiful, beautiful cemetery. But a back part of that cemetery actually dates back to the famine.
Wow.
Yeah. And these lads, again, as boys are wont to do, used to go experimenting a little bit. And they were in the back thing one day, and they found one of the graves open. It was a raised grave. So, the bravado of the boys, they decided to start exploring, and they found a skull in there. I shouldn't have done it. I probably shouldn't be telling you this. Probably what they did was totally illegal. But anyway, they took the skull. They attached a string to it. And one night, they decided to go pay Nell Devan a visit. And they climbed up on the roof of Nell's house, which would have been a little old thatched cottage, And she would have had one of those huge open fireplaces. She'd been sitting there, the old ladies would be sitting in front of the fireplace. No fire lighting in it, but anyway. They got up on the roof of the house and they dropped the skull on the string.
In the chimney?
Down the chimney. And they started to go up and down with it. Well, they could hear their stories of the screams inside in the house. They were bad. I mean, they were awful. So, I mean, I knew they had got up to mischief when we were kids, but when I heard that, I was like, oh, good gosh, the poor woman, the poor woman. But she was one of those people you'd be frightened of, and you felt she had some sort of witch-like qualities.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was Nell Devan. Oh, they were brats. They really were.
Did your houses have thatches either?
No.
They were.
No.
And at night, now you've been out. Of course, in the summertime it's light out till 11 o'clock at night, so you probably not allowed. But was there storytelling that would happen in the evenings at nighttime?
Not really. I mean, never. If it did, it would be very spontaneous, and it's more around the dinner table kind of stuff. And when we were kids, listening to the old people talk, it used to bore us. We didn't want to hear any of their stories.
Yeah.
There would have been a lot around us. And a lot of them would have been of pretty national significance historically. My mother has memories of the Black and Tans coming into her house and actually raiding the house, because my grandfather was very involved with the old IRA. And she remembers in the middle of the night them coming in and the kids being thrown out and mattresses being ripped asunder, and so they had quite an interesting. And then my mother's brother actually ended up serving time in prison on the Curragh camp for old IRA activities. Yeah. He was actually in prison with Brendan Behan, and he taught Brendan Behan how to speak Irish.
Oh, for heaven's sakes!
Yeah, he did.
That's a terrific story.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Sean O'Brien. Yeah. And then he ended up marrying. You've heard of Cathal Brugha?
No.
Cathal Brugha was killed in 1922 in the Civil War. He was one of the first ministers in the Irish government in 1922.